White waitress dumps wine on black pregnant woman, unaware she's the Mafia boss's wife. The $400 bottle of Bordeaux hit Valentina Pekin's silk dress at exactly 9:23 p.m., and in that crimson-stained moment, Maggie Brooks sealed her fate without knowing she'd just declared war on the most dangerous man in Meridian City. Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how this story touched you. Have you ever witnessed someone's life change in a single moment of poor judgment? Drop a comment and tell me about it. And make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss stories shared here every day. But let's rewind to understand how two women from completely different worlds ended up in the same restaurant on this Tuesday night that would change everything. Maggie's world, 6:47 p.m. The eviction notice crumpled in Maggie Brooks' trembling hands as she stood in the hallway of her rundown apartment building in Riverside District. 72 hours. That's all she had left before her 8-year-old daughter Luna would be sleeping in their beat-up Honda Civic again. "Mama, what's that paper?" Luna's voice drifted from behind the thin apartment door, innocent and trusting in a way that made Maggie's chest tighten with guilt. "Nothing, baby. Just some mail," Maggie called back, her voice cracking as she shoved the notice into her purse next to the other bills she couldn't pay. Electricity, $340 past due. Car payment, 2 months behind. Groceries, whatever she could scrape together from tips. At 28, Maggie looked 40. The stress had carved lines around her green eyes, and her once bright auburn hair hung limp and lifeless. She'd been beautiful once, homecoming queen, full scholarship to nursing school, a future that sparkled with promise. But teenage pregnancy, an abusive boyfriend who disappeared, and a series of dead-end jobs had slowly stripped away every dream she'd ever held. The worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the bitterness that had grown inside her like a cancer, feeding on every rejection, every condescending look from customers who had what she'd never have. 3 weeks ago, she'd been passed over for the assistant manager position at Bellinate, the upscale Italian restaurant where she'd worked double shifts for 2 years. They'd given it to Jennifer, a 22-year-old blonde whose daddy owned half the city. Jennifer, who'd never worried about rent or wondered if her child would eat dinner. "I'm working late tonight, Luna," Maggie said, forcing brightness into her voice as she opened the apartment door. Her daughter sat cross-legged on their second-hand couch, homework spread across a TV tray, her dark hair falling in waves that reminded Maggie painfully of her own mother. Again, Luna's face fell. "You promised we'd watch a movie tonight." The guilt hit Maggie like a physical blow. "I know, sweetheart, but Mama needs the extra money. Mrs. Rodriguez will check on you, okay?" Luna nodded, but Maggie caught the flash of disappointment before her daughter looked away. 8 years old, and already learning that promises from adults meant nothing. As Maggie grabbed her server apron and headed for the door, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, uniform that had seen better days. She looked exactly like what she was, desperate. And desperation, she'd learned, made people cruel. Valentina's world, 7:15 p.m. 45 minutes across town, Valentina Pekin stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in her penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below like scattered diamonds. Her hand rested protectively on her 7-month belly, feeling the gentle movements of the daughter she and Dante had tried for 3 years to conceive. At 31, Valentina possessed the kind of quiet elegance that turned heads without effort. Her dark skin glowed with health and happiness, her natural hair styled in an intricate updo that had taken her stylist 2 hours to perfect. The midnight blue silk dress she wore cost more than most people made in a month, but she'd earned every thread through years of building her art gallery into one of the most respected in the state. "You sure you don't want me to come with you tonight?" Dante's voice rumbled from behind her, warm and concerned. She turned to find her husband adjusting his cufflinks, his dark eyes studying her face with the intensity that had first captured her heart 5 years ago. Dante Pecans was a man who commanded attention without saying a word. 6'3", broad shoulders that filled out his custom suits perfectly, and an aura of controlled power that made even hardened businessmen step carefully around him. What the public knew was that he owned construction companies, security firms, and real estate across 3 states. What they whispered about in dark corners was something else entirely. "I'll be fine," Valentina said, reaching up to straighten his tie. "It's just dinner with the gallery board. Besides, you have that meeting with the Santangelo brothers." Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Santangelo meeting wasn't the kind that appeared on any official calendar. "I don't like you going out alone. Not with everything that's been happening." Everything referred to the recent tensions in their world. Rival families testing boundaries, federal investigations getting too close, the constant dance between legitimate business and the shadows that had made Dante's empire possible. But Valentina had grown up in this life. Her father had been a respected man in their community, and she understood the rules, the dangers, and the absolute necessity of maintaining appearances. "I'm having dinner at Bellinate, not walking through a war zone," she said, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. "Besides, Rico will be nearby." Rico Santangelo, Dante's most trusted lieutenant, would be dining alone at the bar, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to give Valentina the independence she cherished. It was a compromise they'd reached after months of arguments about her safety. "Call me when you get there. Call me when you leave. And if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately." Dante's hands cupped her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "You and our daughter are everything to me. Everything." The intensity in his voice made Valentina's heart skip. This was the man the streets feared, the one whose name was whispered with respect and terror in equal measure. But with her, he was simply the husband who brought her coffee in bed every morning and spent hours talking to their unborn daughter through her belly. "We'll be fine," she promised, meaning it. After all, what could possibly go wrong at dinner? The collision course, 8:30 p.m. As Valentina's driver pulled up to Bellinate, Maggie was already 3 hours into her shift, her fake smile wearing thin as she served couples who spent more on wine than she made in a week. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet conversations of Meridian City's elite. Politicians, business owners, old money families who'd never known what it meant to choose between groceries and electricity. Valentina entered alone, her presence immediately commanding attention. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be, her designer dress and jewelry marking her as exactly the kind of customer Bellinate catered to. But Maggie saw something else. She saw another beautiful, successful woman who had everything Maggie would never have. Another reminder of how unfair life could be. As Valentina was seated at a corner table, the best in the house, naturally, Maggie felt that familiar bitterness rise in her throat like bile. The woman was probably younger than her, definitely richer, and clearly living the life Maggie had once dreamed of. Have you ever witnessed someone's life change in a single moment of poor judgment? Drop a comment and tell me about it. Neither woman knew that in less than an hour, their worlds would collide in a way that would expose the very worst and very best of human nature. Neither knew that this Tuesday night would become the story their families would tell for generations. But fate was already in motion, and some collisions are simply inevitable. The wine incident happened at exactly 9:23 p.m., but the real story began 20 minutes earlier when Maggie Brooks noticed the pregnant woman sitting alone. Valentina had been waiting patiently at table 12, occasionally glancing at her phone and smiling softly as she read what were clearly loving messages from her husband. Her hand moved in gentle circles over her belly, and twice Maggie had seen her lips move in what looked like quiet conversation with her unborn child. Everything about the woman screamed money and privilege. The way she held herself, the casual elegance of her posture, the fact that she'd ordered the most expensive appetizer without even glancing at the price. But it was more than that. It was the serene confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Maggie's resentment had been building all evening. Earlier, she'd served a table of college girls who'd left a $5 tip on a $150 bill. Before that, a businessman had snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog, demanding she bring his steak back because it was barely warm. Each interaction had added another layer to the rage simmering just beneath her professional smile. "Table 12 needs a wine refill," Jennifer called out as she breezed past the service station, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite working the same shift as Maggie. Jennifer, who got the promotion. Jennifer, who would never understand what it meant to count every penny. Maggie grabbed the bottle of Bordeaux, a 2015 vintage that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and headed toward Valentina's table. With each step, the bitterness grew stronger. Here was another woman who had everything handed to her, sitting in a restaurant that cost more than Maggie's rent, probably waiting for some rich husband to sweep her off to their mansion. The rational part of Maggie's mind whispered warnings. This was her job. She needed this job. Luna needed her to keep this job. But the desperate, angry part of her, the part that had been growing stronger with each unpaid bill and each sleepless night, was louder. Valentina looked up as Maggie approached, her smile genuine and warm. "Thank you so much. This is delicious." Her voice carried a slight southern accent, cultured but not pretentious. That smile was the final straw. It was the same polite, distant smile Maggie had seen 1,000 times from customers who saw her as nothing more than hired help. The smile of someone who'd never worried about anything real in her entire privileged life. "You know what?" Maggie said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I'm so tired of people like you." Valentina's eyebrows rose slightly, confusion replacing her smile. "Excuse me?" "People like you," Maggie repeated, her grip tightening on the wine bottle. "Coming in here, flashing your designer clothes and your jewelry, acting like you own the world. Do you have any idea what it's like for the rest of us? Do you even care?" The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade as nearby diners began to notice the tension. Valentina's hand moved protectively to her belly, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious threat. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Maggie cut her off, years of suppressed rage finally finding a target. "I see exactly what you are. Another spoiled princess who's never worked a day in her life, never worried about keeping the lights on, never had to choose between feeding her kid and paying rent." Valentina's eyes flashed with something dangerous, but her voice remained steady. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Maggie snarled. "I know you're sitting here ordering $400 wine while people like me work ourselves to death just to survive. I know you probably think you're better than everyone else in this room." The words hung in the air like poison. Valentina slowly placed her hands flat on the table, her composure absolute despite the growing scene. "I think you should step away from my table." But Maggie was past the point of rational thought. The eviction notice in her purse, Luna's disappointed face, years of watching other people live the life she'd dreamed of. It all crystallized into this moment, this woman, this symbol of everything she'd never have. "Maybe you need to learn what the real world feels like," Maggie said, and before she could stop herself, before she could think about consequences or Luna or anything beyond her own pain, she tilted the bottle. The Bordeaux hit Valentina's dress like a crimson waterfall, soaking through the silk to her skin. The wine was cold from the cellar, and Valentina gasped as it spread across her chest and belly, staining the midnight blue fabric beyond repair. The entire restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze midair. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause as if the building itself was holding its breath. Valentina sat perfectly still, wine dripping from her dress onto the marble floor. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took to contain the fury building inside her. She could feel her baby moving restlessly, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. "Oops," Maggie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "My bad. Maybe you should stick to places where you actually belong instead of pretending to be something you're not." The cruelty in those words cut deeper than the wine ever could. Valentina had faced racism before, subtle slights, coded language, assumptions about her intelligence or background. But this was different. This was public humiliation designed to strip away her dignity in front of a room full of strangers. For a moment, Valentina felt like the scared little girl she'd once been. Growing up in a neighborhood where respect was earned through strength and silence was often the safest response. But then she felt her daughter kick, as if reminding her of who she really was. Slowly, deliberately, Valentina stood. Wine continued to cascade from her ruined dress, but she held herself with the regal bearing of a queen. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made everyone in the restaurant lean forward to hear. You have no idea what you just did. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. Spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly how power worked in the real world. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed it away. This was just another rich woman trying to intimidate her. What are you going to do? Call the manager? Get me fired? Go ahead. I don't care anymore. But even as she said it, Maggie noticed things that made her stomach clench with unease. The way the other diners were looking at the pregnant woman, not with pity, but with something that looked almost like fear. The way the maitre d' had gone pale and was frantically whispering into his phone. The way a man at the bar had stood up and was moving closer, his hand inside his jacket. Valentina reached into her purse with hands that barely shook and pulled out exact change for her untouched meal. She placed it on the table along with a tip that made Maggie's eyes widen. $500 in crisp bills. For your trouble, Valentina said quietly, her eyes never leaving Maggie's face. And for your daughter. The mention of Luna hit Maggie like a physical blow. How could this woman possibly know about her daughter? As Valentina walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the wine stains and the whispers following her, Maggie felt something cold settle in her stomach. This hadn't felt like victory. This felt like she'd just stepped off a cliff and was only now beginning to fall. Outside, a black SUV waited at the curb, its engine running. As Valentina approached, a man stepped out of the driver's side, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Maggie's car. When he saw his wife's condition, his expression shifted to something that would have terrified anyone who witnessed it. Through the restaurant's windows, Maggie watched as the man gently helped Valentina into the passenger seat, his movements tender despite the rage clearly building inside him. She saw Valentina's lips move, saw the man's jaw clench, saw him look back at the restaurant with eyes that promised consequences. What do you think happens when someone with real power decides to teach a lesson about respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As the SUV pulled away into the night, Maggie stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, wine bottle still in her hand, finally beginning to understand that she might have just made the biggest mistake of her life. The silence in Bella Notte stretched for exactly 17 seconds after Valentina left. Then the whispers started. Did you see who that was? Oh my God, someone's going to die. That waitress has no idea what she just did. Maggie stood frozen in the center of the dining room, the empty wine bottle trembling in her grip. The rational part of her mind screamed that something was very wrong, but her pride, wounded and desperate, fought back with venomous justification. What are you all staring at? She snapped at the nearest table, an elderly couple who quickly looked away. She got what she deserved, acting like she owns the place. But even as the words left her mouth, Maggie noticed things that made her stomach twist. The maitre d', Vincent Carlucci, was on his phone again, speaking in rapid Italian with increasing panic in his voice. The man from the bar, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that suggested violence, was watching her with calculating eyes. Maggie. Vincent's voice cut through the restaurant chatter like a blade. My office. Now. The walk to Vincent's office felt like a death march. Other servers stepped aside as she passed, their faces mixtures of shock and pity. Jennifer stood by the hostess station, her mouth hanging open, all traces of her usual smugness replaced by something that looked like terror. Vincent's office was cramped and cluttered, smelling of espresso and old cigarettes. Family photos covered one wall, Vincent with various politicians, business leaders, and men whose faces Maggie recognized from newspaper crime sections. She'd never paid attention to those photos before, but now they seemed to pulse with significance. Sit down, Vincent said, closing the door behind them. His usually jovial demeanor had vanished, replaced by the hard expression of a man who'd survived 40 years in a business where mistakes could be fatal. Look, Vincent, I know what you're going to say. You know nothing, he cut her off, his accent thicker than usual. Nothing at all. Do you have any idea who you just humiliated? Maggie's defiance flickered. Some rich woman who thinks she's better than everyone else. Vincent stared at her for a long moment, then walked to his desk and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured himself a generous glass and downed it in one gulp. Valentina Picunz. Does that name mean anything to you? Should it? Her husband is Dante Picans. Vincent watched Maggie's face carefully, looking for recognition that didn't come. Dante Picans owns half the city, Maggie. Construction, security, real estate. And other things. Things that don't appear on tax returns. The cold feeling in Maggie's stomach spread. So he's rich. So what? So what? Vincent's voice rose. Maggie, you just dumped wine on the wife of the most dangerous man in 3 states. You humiliated her in public. You threatened his unborn child. I didn't threaten anyone. You stressed a pregnant woman to the point where she could have gone into early labor. Vincent slammed his glass down. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any concept of what Dante Picans does to people who threaten his family? Maggie's mouth went dry. The whispers from the dining room suddenly made sense. The fear in people's eyes. The way that man at the bar had moved like a predator. You're exaggerating, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is America. People don't just. People disappear, Maggie. They have accidents. Their businesses burn down. Their children get hurt. Vincent's voice was deadly serious. I've seen it happen. I've seen what happens to people who cross the wrong families. The word families hung in the air with weight that made Maggie's knees weak. She thought about Luna, alone in their apartment, trusting that her mother would come home safe. What am I supposed to do? The question came out as a whisper. Pray, Vincent said simply. Pray that Dante Picans is feeling merciful. Pray that his wife talks him out of whatever he's planning. And pray that you haven't just signed your own death warrant. Meanwhile, across town, Valentina sat in the passenger seat of the SUV, her ruined dress clinging to her skin, trying to control her breathing as early contractions rippled through her abdomen. The stress of the humiliation had triggered her body's fight-or-flight response, and she could feel her daughter responding to the flood of stress hormones. Breathe, baby, Dante said, his voice gentle despite the fury radiating from every line of his body. His hand rested on her thigh, thumb tracing soothing circles while his other hand gripped his phone with white knuckles. Just breathe. We're almost to the hospital. I'm okay, Valentina said, but they both knew it was a lie. The contractions were getting stronger, more regular. At 7 months, their daughter wasn't ready to be born. Dante, I'm scared. Those 3 words hit him harder than any physical blow ever could. Valentina Picans didn't scare easily. She'd grown up in their world, understood its dangers, faced down federal agents and rival families with ice in her veins. But now she was scared, and it was because some bitter waitress had decided to take out her frustrations on a pregnant woman. Rico, Dante said into his phone, his voice deadly calm. I need everything on the waitress from Bellinate. Everything. Family, address, debts, weaknesses. I want to know what she had for breakfast this morning. Already on it, boss, Rico's voice crackled through the speaker. Maggie Brooks, 28, single mother. Lives in Riverside District, apartment 4B. Daughter named Luna, 8 years old. She's broke, behind on everything, got an eviction notice today. Dante's jaw clenched. A single mother. That complicated things, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. Keep digging. I want to know why she thought she could disrespect my wife. Another contraction hit Valentina, stronger this time, and she gripped Dante's hand with surprising force. The baby. We're here, Dante said as they pulled up to Meridian General Hospital. Everything's going to be fine. I promise. But as he helped his wife out of the car, Dante's mind was already working through possibilities. The waitress had humiliated Valentina in public, threatened their unborn child, and shown the kind of disrespect that couldn't go unanswered. In his world, reputation was everything. Let one person get away with something like this, and others would think they could do the same. The emergency room staff recognized them immediately. Dr. Sarah Chun, Valentina's obstetrician, was called in despite the late hour. As they wheeled Valentina into an examination room, Dante stood in the hallway, his phone buzzing with calls from associates who'd already heard about the incident. Mr. Picans? Dr. Chin emerged from the room 20 minutes later, her expression cautious. Your wife is stable, but she's definitely experiencing stress-induced contractions. We're going to keep her overnight for observation. The baby? Strong heartbeat, good movement. But Mrs. Picans needs to avoid stress for the remainder of her pregnancy. Any additional trauma could trigger premature labor. Dante nodded, but inside, his fury was building to dangerous levels. Someone had threatened his family. Someone had put his wife and daughter at risk. And that someone was going to learn exactly what happened to people who crossed the Pekins family. Can I see her? Of course. But Mr. Pekins. Dr. Chen's voice carried a warning. Whatever you're thinking about doing, consider your wife and daughter first. They need you here, not dealing with whatever consequences might come from other actions. Dante's smile was cold. Doctor, I appreciate your concern. But some lessons need to be taught. As he entered Valentina's room, he found her staring out the window at the city lights, one hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her bed. How are you feeling? Humiliated, she whispered. Angry. Scared for our daughter. She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. That woman didn't just dump wine on me, Dante. She tried to break me. In front of all those people, she tried to make me feel small and worthless. She failed, Dante said firmly. You are the strongest woman I know. You are my queen and our daughter's mother, and no bitter waitress can change that. I know, Valentina said. But she needs to understand what she did. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. Dante leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. What do you want me to do? Valentina was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. When she spoke, her voice carried the steel that had first attracted him to her. I want her to understand what it feels like to lose everything. I want her to know what real fear is. But Dante, she looked directly into his eyes. I don't want her hurt. She has a daughter. Dante nodded slowly. His wife's mercy was one of the things he loved most about her, but it also meant he'd have to be creative in his response. Maggie Brooks would learn her lesson, but she'd live to remember it. Do you think Maggie deserves what's coming to her, or has she already suffered enough? Let me know in the comments. As Dante kissed his wife's forehead and promised her that everything would be handled, Maggie Brooks was driving home through the dark streets of Meridian City, still trying to convince herself that she'd done nothing wrong. She had no idea that her life, as she knew it, was about to end. Maggie's hands shook as she turned the key in her apartment door at 11:47 p.m. The hallway light had burned out weeks ago, leaving her fumbling in darkness that seemed to press against her like a living thing. Every shadow looked threatening now, every sound made her jump. Mama? Luna's sleepy voice drifted from the couch where she'd fallen asleep waiting. You're home late. I know, baby, Maggie whispered, gathering her daughter in her arms. Luna felt so small, so fragile. The weight of Vincent's words pressed down on her chest like a stone. Their children get hurt. You're shaking, Luna said, her 8-year-old intuition picking up on her mother's fear. Are you sick? Just tired, Maggie lied, carrying Luna to their shared bed. As she tucked her daughter under the thin blanket, she tried to push away the images Vincent's words had conjured. This was America. People didn't just disappear because of restaurant incidents. Vincent was being dramatic. But as she lay in the darkness listening to Luna's steady breathing, Maggie couldn't shake the memory of those whispers in the restaurant. The fear in people's eyes. The way that man at the bar had moved with predatory grace. At 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Riverside Diner, 2 p.m. Come alone. Maggie stared at the message until her eyes burned. Who had her number? How did they know where she lived? Riverside was her neighborhood. The cold feeling in her stomach spread until her whole body felt numb. She didn't sleep. The next morning, Bellinate Restaurant. Vincent Carlucci arrived at his restaurant at 6 a.m. to find 2 black SUVs parked outside. His hands trembled as he unlocked the front door, knowing exactly who was waiting for him. Dante Pekins sat at the same table where his wife had been humiliated 12 hours earlier. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Vincent's car, and his stillness was more terrifying than any display of anger could have been. Mr. Pekins, Vincent said, his voice barely steady. How is Mrs. Pekins? Stable, Dante replied without looking up from the wine stain on the marble floor. For now. Rico Santangelo stood by the windows, his presence filling the empty restaurant with tension. 2 other men Vincent didn't recognize flanked the exits. This wasn't a social call. I've been thinking about last night, Dante continued, his voice conversational. About respect. About consequences. About what happens when someone threatens my family. Vincent's mouth went dry. Mr. Peekins, I want you to know that Maggie Brooks no longer works here. I fired her immediately after. Did you? Dante's eyes finally met Vincent's, and the restaurant owner felt his knees go weak. Because according to my information, she's still on your payroll. Still has her key. Still thinks she can walk into my wife's favorite restaurant like nothing happened. I was going to handle it this morning. You were going to handle it? Dante stood slowly, his movement fluid and controlled. Vincent, you've been running this place for 15 years. You know who your customers are. You know what kind of neighborhood this is. And you let some bitter waitress humiliate my pregnant wife in front of half the city's elite. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Vincent had indeed known better. Bella Nate catered to a specific clientele, people with power, money, and connections that ran deep into the city's underground. He built his reputation on discretion and respect, and Maggie's outburst had shattered both. What do you want me to do? Vincent asked. Dante smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Vincent had ever seen. I want you to call her. Tell her she needs to come in today to collect her final paycheck. Tell her there are some irregularities in her employment records that need to be discussed. And then she learns what happens when you disrespect the wrong family. Riverside Diner, 2 p.m. Maggie sat in a corner booth at the Riverside Diner, her coffee growing cold as she watched every person who entered. The text message had consumed her thoughts all morning, and she'd barely been able to focus on Luna's questions about why she wasn't going to work. At exactly 2:15, a woman entered who made Maggie's breath catch. She was elegant, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that commanded attention. But it wasn't until she slid into the booth across from Maggie that recognition hit like a physical blow. You, Maggie whispered. Valentina Peekins looked different in daylight, wearing a simple but expensive cream-colored dress that accommodated her pregnancy. Her makeup was flawless, hiding any trace of the previous night's trauma, but her eyes held something that made Maggie want to run. Me, Valentina agreed, her voice calm. Thank you for coming. How did you get my number? How did you know I'd be here? I know a lot of things about you, Maggie Brooks. I know you live at 847 Riverside Avenue, apartment 4B. I know your daughter Luna is 8 years old and attends Jefferson Elementary. I know you're 3 months behind on rent and got an eviction notice yesterday. Each fact hit Maggie like a slap. You've been watching me? My husband has people who are very good at finding information. Valentina's hand moved to her belly in a protective gesture. The question is, what are we going to do about what happened last night? Maggie's defiance flickered back to life. Look, I'm sorry about your dress, okay? I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you. But you can afford another dress. You'll be fine. Valentina's laugh was soft and dangerous. You think this is about a dress? Isn't it? You humiliated me in front of 50 people. You stressed me to the point where I spent the night in the hospital with early contractions. You could have killed my daughter. Valentina's voice remained calm, but her eyes blazed. And you think this is about a dress? The hospital. Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't know you were. I didn't think. You didn't think at all. You saw a successful black woman and decided she needed to be put in her place. You made assumptions about who I am, where I come from, what I've earned. Valentina leaned forward slightly. Would you like to know who I really am, Maggie? Maggie nodded, unable to speak. I grew up in a neighborhood that makes Riverside look like paradise. My father was shot when I was 12. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in art history, and built my gallery from nothing. I've earned every dollar I have, every piece of respect I command. Each word was a knife twist. Maggie had created an entire narrative about this woman based on nothing but her own bitterness and prejudice. But more importantly, Valentina continued, I'm married to a man who would burn this entire city down if someone threatened our family. Do you understand what that means? Vincent said, he said your husband was dangerous. Vincent was being kind. Valentina's smile was razor-sharp. My husband doesn't just own businesses, Maggie. He owns people. Judges, police commissioners, city council members. When Dante Peekins wants something to happen, it happens. When he wants someone to disappear, they disappear. Maggie's hands started shaking again. What do you want from me? I want you to understand the position you've put yourself in. Right now, my husband is deciding what your punishment should be. He's considering options that would terrify you if you knew what they were. I have a daughter, Maggie whispered. So do I, Valentina replied. The difference is mine is safe. Yours. She let the implication hang in the air. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. Maggie could feel walls closing in around her, could see her entire life crumbling because of one moment of stupid, bitter rage. Please, she said, the word barely audible. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong, I was stupid, I was... You were cruel, Valentina cut her off. You were racist. You were everything that's wrong with people who think they can judge others based on the color of their skin or the clothes they wear. Tears started flowing down Maggie's cheeks. What can I do? How can I fix this? Valentina studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. That depends. Are you sorry because you're scared, or are you sorry because you understand what you did was wrong? Both, Maggie admitted. I've been so angry for so long. At everyone who has what I don't have. At the world for being unfair. And last night, you were just there. And I took it all out on you. And my daughter almost paid the price for your anger. The weight of that statement crushed down on Maggie. She thought about Luna, about how she'd feel if someone's actions had threatened her child. The guilt was overwhelming. I don't know how to make this right, Maggie said through her tears. Valentina was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. When she spoke, her voice carried a different tone, not forgiveness, but something that might eventually lead there. My husband wants to destroy you. Completely. He wants to take everything you have, everything you love, and grind it to dust. And honestly, part of me wants to let him. Maggie's sobs grew louder. But, Valentina continued, I believe people can change. I believe in second chances. So I'm going to make you an offer. Maggie looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You're going to work for me. At my gallery. You're going to learn about respect, about dignity, about treating people with kindness regardless of their background. You're going to become the person your daughter deserves as a mother. What? The pay is better than Bellinate. The hours are reasonable. You'll have health insurance for you and Luna. But if you ever show that kind of hatred again, if you ever treat another person the way you treated me, my husband will finish what he started. Do you understand? Maggie nodded frantically. Yes. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Valentina said, standing slowly. You haven't earned forgiveness. You've earned a chance to try. What you do with that chance is up to you. As Valentina walked away, Maggie sat in the booth crying, from relief, from shame, from the overwhelming realization that she'd been given a gift she didn't deserve. What would you do if someone gave you a second chance after you'd made the worst mistake of your life? Share your thoughts below. Outside the diner, Dante waited in the SUV, his jaw clenched as he watched his wife emerge. This wasn't the justice he'd planned, but he trusted Valentina's judgment. She'd always been better at seeing the potential for redemption in people. But if Maggie Brooks failed this test, if she hurt his wife again in any way, mercy would not be offered twice. 3 days later, Maggie stood outside the Meridian Gallery of Contemporary Art, her hands trembling as she clutched the address Valentina had given her. The building was a converted warehouse in the arts district, its brick facade elegant and understated. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see paintings that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire life. This is your second chance, she told herself. Don't screw it up. The gallery's interior took her breath away. Natural light flooded the space, illuminating carefully curated collections that spoke of sophisticated taste and deep knowledge. Valentina stood near a massive abstract painting, speaking quietly with a well-dressed couple who hung on her every word. Watching her, Maggie felt the full weight of her assumptions from that night. This wasn't just a rich woman playing at having a career. This was someone who'd built something meaningful, something beautiful. Mrs. Brooks. Valentina's voice carried across the space as the couple left. Right on time. Maggie approached nervously, still not quite believing this was real. Thank you again for this opportunity. I won't let you down. We'll see. Valentina's tone was professional, neither warm nor cold. Before we begin, I think you should understand exactly who you're working for, and why I'm giving you this chance. She led Maggie to a small office in the back, its walls covered with photographs and newspaper clippings. Maggie's eyes widened as she took in the images. A young Valentina receiving academic awards, cutting ribbons at gallery openings, shaking hands with mayors and celebrities. "Sit," Valentina said, settling carefully into her chair. At 7 months pregnant, every movement required consideration. "I want to tell you a story." Maggie sat, her attention completely focused. "I was born in East Side," Valentina began, naming a neighborhood that made Riverside look affluent. "My father, Marcus, ran numbers for the Torino family. Small-time stuff, but it kept food on the table." The casual mention of organized crime made Maggie's stomach clench, but Valentina continued as if discussing the weather. "When I was 12, a rival crew decided my father was skimming. They were wrong, but in that world, accusations and facts carry the same weight." Valentina's voice remained steady, but her hand moved protectively to her belly. "They shot him outside our apartment building. 3 bullets to the chest while I watched from our window." Maggie's breath caught. "Oh my God. My mother, Elena, was a seamstress. After my father died, she worked 18-hour days to keep us afloat. I'd come home from school to find her asleep at her sewing machine, blood on her fingers from where the needles had pricked her." Valentina's eyes grew distant. She never complained, never said it was unfair. She just worked. The parallel to Maggie's own struggles wasn't lost on either woman. "I was angry," Valentina continued. "Furious at the world, at God, at everyone who had more than we did. I'd walk through the wealthy neighborhoods and hate every person I saw. I'd imagine terrible things happening to them, convince myself they didn't deserve what they had." Maggie shifted uncomfortably, recognizing herself in the description. "When I was 15, I got a job cleaning offices downtown. One night, I was emptying trash in an art gallery when I saw a painting that stopped me cold. It was abstract, all blues and grays, but somehow it captured exactly how I felt, lost, angry, but still hoping for something better." Valentina stood and walked to a small painting on her office wall. It was the same piece she'd described, now carefully preserved and lit. "The gallery owner found me staring at it. Instead of firing me for being where I shouldn't be, she asked what I saw in it. I told her it looked like drowning and flying at the same time. She smiled and said that was the most insightful interpretation she'd heard." "Mrs. Catherine Whitmore," Valentina continued, touching the painting's frame gently. 73 years old, white, wealthy, everything I'd been taught to resent. But she saw something in me. She started leaving art books where I'd find them while cleaning. She'd accidentally schedule her gallery talks for times when I was working." Maggie found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story. "One day, she offered me a scholarship to art school. Full tuition, living expenses, everything. I was so suspicious I almost said no. I couldn't understand why this rich white woman would want to help some angry kid from East Side. Why did she? Because she'd been where I was. Her family lost everything in the Depression. She'd worked her way up from nothing, and she recognized the hunger in me, the need to create something beautiful in a world that had shown me mostly ugliness." Valentina returned to her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Whitmore taught me that anger is just pain wearing a disguise. She showed me that the energy I was using to hate could be channeled into something productive instead. The lesson wasn't subtle, and Maggie felt it hit home like a physical blow. I graduated summa cum laude from Meridian University. Art history and business administration. I worked at 3 different galleries, learning everything I could about the industry. When Mrs. Whitmore retired, she sold me this building for a fraction of its value. Said it was an investment in the future." "That's incredible," Maggie said softly. "The point is, I understand what it's like to be angry at the world. I understand what it's like to look at someone and make assumptions based on their appearance or their circumstances. But I also learned that those assumptions are usually wrong, and they always make you smaller than you really are." Valentina pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between them. "This is everything my husband's people found out about you." Maggie's blood ran cold. "Everything. Your father left when you were 16. Your mother died of cancer 2 years later, leaving you with medical bills that destroyed your credit. You got pregnant at 19, and Luna's father disappeared when you told him. You've worked 3 jobs at a time to keep your daughter fed and housed. Each fact was delivered without judgment, but Maggie felt exposed, vulnerable. You were accepted to nursing school with a partial scholarship, but you couldn't afford the rest. You've applied for financial aid 17 times in the past 5 years and been denied every time due to your credit score. Tears started flowing down Maggie's cheeks. Her entire life, reduced to a series of failures and disappointments. You're not a bad person, Maggie, Valentina said gently. You're a person who's been beaten down by circumstances beyond your control. But that doesn't excuse what you did to me. Pain doesn't give you the right to inflict pain on others. I know, Maggie whispered. I know that now. Do you? Because 3 nights ago, you looked at me and saw everything you thought you'd never have. You didn't see a woman who'd lost her father to violence, who'd watched her mother work herself to death, who'd fought for every opportunity she'd ever received. You saw skin color and expensive clothes and made a judgment. The words cut deep because they were true. Maggie had created an entire narrative about Valentina based on nothing but her own bitterness and prejudice. I want to be better, Maggie said. I want to be the kind of person Luna can be proud of. I don't know how. Valentina was quiet for a long moment, studying Maggie's face. My husband wanted to destroy you. Completely. Do you know what that would have looked like? Maggie shook her head, not sure she wanted to know. Your eviction would have been expedited. Your car would have been repossessed. Every job application you submitted would have been mysteriously rejected. Luna would have ended up in foster care while you lived on the streets. The casual way Valentina described this destruction made it even more terrifying. This wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact about what could have happened. But I convinced him to give you this chance instead. Do you know why? Because you're a better person than I am? Because I see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet. The same thing Mrs. Whitmore saw in me, potential. The capacity to transform pain into purpose. Valentina opened the folder and pulled out a job description. Gallery assistant. $40,000 a year to start, with health benefits. Your job will be to help visitors understand the art, to share the stories behind the pieces, to make people feel welcome regardless of their background. Maggie stared at the paper, hardly believing what she was reading. It was more money than she'd ever made, with benefits that would change Luna's life. There's one condition, Valentina continued. You'll also be attending night classes. Art history, cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution. I want you to understand not just what you did wrong, but why it was wrong. I'll do anything, Maggie said quickly. Anything you want. I don't want your gratitude, Maggie. I want your growth. I want you to become someone who would never, ever treat another human being the way you treated me. As if summoned by their conversation, the gallery's front door chimed. Through the office window, Maggie could see a tall, imposing man entering. Even from a distance, his presence filled the space with barely contained power. That's my husband, Valentina said, standing slowly. He's here to meet you. Maggie's mouth went dry. Meet me? He needs to see that you understand the gravity of what happened. That you're worthy of the mercy I've shown you. Valentina's voice carried a warning. Dante doesn't believe in second chances, Maggie. I had to fight him to give you this opportunity. Don't make me regret it. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself? Tell us about it in the comments. As they walked toward the main gallery, Maggie felt like she was walking toward her judgment. Dante Pekin stood with his back to them, studying a painting with the same intensity he probably brought to business negotiations. When he turned, his dark eyes fixed on Maggie with an assessment that made her feel like prey. This was the moment that would determine whether her second chance was real, or whether Valentina's mercy had limits that were about to be tested. Dante Pekin's turned slowly, and Maggie felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. He was even more imposing up close, 6'3" of controlled power wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. But it was his eyes that made her knees weak. They held the kind of cold calculation that suggested he'd made life-and-death decisions and slept peacefully afterward. So, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that made every word sound deliberate. You're the woman who thought it was acceptable to assault my pregnant wife. Dante, Valentina said softly, moving to stand beside him. Her presence seemed to temper some of his intensity, but not all of it. "I'm sorry," Maggie whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm so sorry." Dante studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Sorry because you got caught? Sorry because there are consequences? Or sorry because you understand what you did was wrong?" The question echoed what Valentina had asked at the diner, and Maggie realized this was a test she couldn't afford to fail. "All of those things," she said honestly. "But mostly sorry because I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Because I let my own pain turn me into someone cruel." "Your own pain," Dante repeated, his tone skeptical. "Tell me about this pain that justifies humiliating my wife." Maggie's first instinct was to defend herself, to explain about the eviction notice and Luna's disappointment and years of struggling. But looking into Dante's eyes, she realized he didn't want excuses. "It doesn't justify anything," she said instead. "Nothing justifies what I did. I was angry at my life, at the world, and I took it out on someone who had nothing to do with my problems." Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that she'd given the right answer. "My wife believes people can change," he said. "I'm less optimistic. But I respect her judgment, so you get one chance. One. If you disappoint her, if you hurt her again in any way, you'll discover that my mercy has very specific limits." The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "I understand," Maggie said. "Do you?" Dante stepped closer, and Maggie caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with something that might have been gun oil. "Because understanding and believing are different things. You need to believe that crossing my family again would be the last mistake you ever make." "Dante," Valentina said again, her hand touching his arm. "She gets it." He looked at his wife, and his expression softened completely. The transformation was startling, from predator to devoted husband in the space of a heartbeat. "How are you feeling? Any contractions today?" "I'm fine," Valentina assured him. "The doctor said the baby's heartbeat is strong. We're both okay." Dante's hand moved to her belly, his touch gentle despite the violence Maggie sensed he was capable of. "I still think you should be resting." "I'm not made of glass," Valentina said with a smile that held genuine affection. "Besides, I have work to do. We have a new employee to train." Dante's gaze returned to Maggie, but some of the ice had melted. "Then I'll leave you to it." "But Mrs. Brooks." He waited until she met his eyes. "My wife is giving you something precious, a second chance. Don't waste it." After he left, the gallery felt like it could breathe again. Valentina watched Maggie's shoulders sag with relief and almost smiled. "He's not usually that restrained," she said. "You should feel honored." "Restrained?" Maggie's voice cracked. "That was restrained? Trust me, you don't want to see him when he's actually angry." Valentina moved toward a display of photographs. "Come on, let's start your education." 2 weeks later. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. Maggie arrived at the gallery each morning 30 minutes early, spending the extra time studying the pieces, reading about the artists, preparing for the day ahead. She'd thrown herself into the night classes with the desperation of someone who understood this was her only shot at redemption. "Tell me about this piece," Valentina said, gesturing toward a large canvas covered in bold strokes of red and black. They were alone in the gallery. It was after hours, but Maggie had stayed late to help with inventory. Luna was at a sleepover, giving Maggie rare freedom to focus completely on her new life. "Rage and Redemption by Marcus Chun," Maggie said, the information flowing naturally now. "He painted it after his brother was killed in a gang shooting. The red represents his anger, the black represents his grief, but see how they blend together here." She pointed to a section where the colors merged. "That's where he found peace." Valentina nodded approvingly. "And what does it say to you personally?" The question caught Maggie off guard. In her previous life, art had been something for rich people, something she couldn't understand or afford to care about. But these past 2 weeks had opened her eyes to something she'd never expected. "It reminds me that anger doesn't have to be destructive," Maggie said slowly. "That you can take the worst parts of yourself and turn them into something meaningful." "Good," Valentina said, settling into a chair with a slight grimace. At 8 months now, every movement was becoming more difficult. "That's exactly what Marcus intended." Maggie noticed the discomfort, and moved quickly to adjust the chair's cushions. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "Just tired," Valentina said, but she accepted the help gratefully. "The baby's been active today. I think she's going to be a dancer." It was the first time Valentina had shared something personal about her pregnancy, and Maggie felt honored by the confidence. "Luna was like that too," Maggie said softly. "She'd kick all night, then sleep all day. The doctor said she was already on her own schedule." "How is Luna adjusting to the new job?" "It must be different, having regular hours." The question showed how much attention Valentina had been paying. Maggie's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She's happier," Maggie admitted. "I can help with her homework now. We eat dinner together. She doesn't have to worry about whether I'll be home." She paused, struggling with the words. "She doesn't have to see me angry all the time." Valentina was quiet for a moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. "Anger is exhausting, isn't it? Carrying it around, feeding it, letting it make your decisions." "I didn't realize how much energy it was taking until I stopped," Maggie said. "I feel lighter, like I can breathe again. That's what Mrs. Whitmore taught me. That forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying hatred." "Have you forgiven me?" The question slipped out before Maggie could stop it. Valentina considered this carefully. "I'm working on it. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. But I can see you're trying to become someone different. Someone better." "I am," Maggie said earnestly. "I want to be the kind of person who builds people up instead of tearing them down. I want Luna to be proud of me." "She already is," Valentina said with certainty. "Children see more than we think they do. She knows you're fighting to give her a better life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by art that spoke of human struggle and triumph. Finally, Valentina spoke again. "I want to show you something," she said, standing slowly. She led Maggie to a small alcove that housed a single painting, a portrait of a young black girl with defiant eyes and paint-stained fingers. "I painted this when I was 16, Valentina said. "It's a self-portrait, but it's also every girl who's ever been told she doesn't belong somewhere. Every woman who's been judged by her appearance instead of her character." Maggie studied the painting, seeing the pain and determination in the young face. "She looks angry." She was. But she was also hopeful. She believed that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself worthy enough, the world would eventually see her value. Did it work? Valentina's smile was complex. "Sometimes. But I learned that you can't control how others see you. You can only control how you see yourself and how you treat others." The lesson wasn't lost on Maggie. "I spent so much time being angry at people for judging me that I became someone who judged others." "The cycle has to break somewhere," Valentina said. "It might as well break with us." As they prepared to close the gallery, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for herself, but for the possibility that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to define you forever. "Valentina," she said as they reached the door. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Valentina paused, her hand on the light switch. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've become the woman you're capable of being." But as they walked to their cars, both women felt something shifting between them. Not friendship yet, that would take time, but the foundation for something real. Something built on honesty, growth, and the shared understanding that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. What's the most important lesson someone has taught you about forgiveness? Share your story in the comments. Neither woman knew that this fragile bond was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Because while Maggie was learning to build bridges, forces from both their pasts were preparing to burn them down. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday night, shattering the fragile peace Maggie had built over the past month. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness, Luna stirring beside her in their shared bed. "Maggie Brooks." The voice was unfamiliar, cold, professional. "Yes. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Meridian PD. We need you to come down to the station immediately." Maggie's blood turned to ice. "What's wrong? Is it my daughter? Is Luna okay?" "Your daughter is fine. This is about your employment at the Meridian Gallery. There's been an incident." The drive to the police station felt like a nightmare. Mrs. Rodriguez had agreed to watch Luna, asking no questions despite the late hour. As Maggie navigated the empty streets, her mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The police station buzzed with activity despite the hour. Detective Martinez was a stern-faced woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen every kind of human cruelty and been disappointed by most of it. "Mrs. Brooks, we need to ask you some questions about your employer, Valentina Peekins." "What kind of questions? What happened? When did you last see Mrs. Peekins?" "Yesterday afternoon. We closed the gallery together around 6. "Why? What's going on?" Detective Martinez slid a photograph across the table. It showed the gallery's front window, shattered, with spray-painted words across the brick wall. "Mafia whore" in red letters. Maggie's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God! Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "Mrs. Peekins is fine. She wasn't at the gallery when this happened. But we have reason to believe this attack is connected to the incident at Bellinate restaurant several weeks ago." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. "The restaurant? But that was resolved." "Was it?" Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Because according to our investigation, you assaulted Mrs. Peekins in a public establishment, and now someone has vandalized her business with racial slurs. That's quite a coincidence." "I didn't do this." Maggie's voice rose in panic. "I would never. Valentina gave me a job. She gave me a second chance. Why would I destroy that? Maybe because you resented having to work for the woman you humiliated. Maybe because you couldn't handle being dependent on her charity." Each accusation felt like a knife twist. Maggie could see how it looked from the outside. The bitter waitress who'd attacked a pregnant woman, now working for her victim, harboring resentment that had finally exploded into violence. "I need to call Valentina," Maggie said desperately. "She'll tell you I didn't do this. Mrs. Peekins is the one who suggested we look into you." The word stopped Maggie's heart. "What?" "She told us about your history of anger issues, your financial desperation, your racist attack at the restaurant. She said you'd been acting strangely lately, asking questions about her husband's business, showing up early and staying late." "That's not. I was trying to do a good job. I was trying to prove myself." But even as she said it, Maggie could see how her dedication might look suspicious to someone looking for guilt. The early arrivals, the late nights, the questions about the art and the artists, all of it could be interpreted as surveillance rather than genuine interest. "We also found this in your locker at the gallery." Detective Martinez produced an evidence bag containing a can of red spray paint. Maggie stared at it in shock. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life. Your fingerprints are on it." "That's impossible." But even as she protested, Maggie's mind was racing. When had she touched a spray paint can? The gallery used various supplies for installations and repairs. She'd helped move boxes, organize storage areas, handle dozens of items over the past month. "I want a lawyer," she said finally. "That's your right. But Mrs. Brooks, if you cooperate with us, if you tell us why you did this, it'll go easier for you. Vandalism and hate crimes carry serious penalties, especially when they're connected to organized crime figures." "I didn't do anything." Maggie's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, you have to believe me. Valentina saved my life. She gave me hope when I had none. I would never hurt her." But Detective Martinez's expression remained skeptical. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, and Maggie's history made her the perfect suspect. 3 hours later, at the Peekins penthouse, Valentina stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. She hadn't slept since Rico's call about the gallery, and the stress was taking its toll. At 8.5 months pregnant, her body couldn't handle much more trauma. "The police arrested her," Dante said from behind her, his voice carefully neutral. "I know." Valentina's reflection in the window looked haunted. "I heard. You don't sound satisfied." Valentina turned to face her husband, seeing the confusion in his dark eyes. "Because I'm not. She vandalized your gallery, Val. She spray-painted racial slurs on the building where you've worked for 10 years to build your reputation. After everything you did for her, this is how she repays you. Something doesn't feel right about this." Dante moved closer, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Baby, I know you wanted to believe she could change. I know you saw something in her that reminded you of yourself. But some people can't be saved. The Maggie I've been working with for the past month wouldn't do this, Valentina insisted. She was grateful, dedicated, genuinely trying to become better. This feels wrong. People can fake gratitude when they need something. Maybe she was just playing a role until she could figure out how to hurt you. Valentina shook her head. You didn't see her with the art, Dante. You didn't see how she lit up when she understood a piece, how carefully she treated everything in the gallery. She wasn't faking that. Then explain the evidence. Her fingerprints on the spray paint can, her access to the building, her history of attacking you. I can't explain it, Valentina admitted. But my gut tells me we're missing something. Dante's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. Rico found something interesting. The security cameras across from the gallery caught footage of the vandalism. And the person was wearing a hoodie, face covered. But they moved wrong. Too smooth, too confident. This wasn't some angry ex-employee having a breakdown. This was professional. Valentina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Professional how? Like someone who knew exactly where the cameras were, how to avoid them, how to make it look like amateur work while leaving just enough evidence to point at Maggie. The implications hit Valentina like a physical blow. Someone set her up. That's what I'm thinking. The question is who and why. Dante's phone rang, and he answered it with a sharp, yeah? Valentina watched his face change as he listened, saw the anger building in his eyes like a storm gathering strength. When? He asked. How long ago? A pause. No, don't move on them yet. I want to know everything first. He hung up and turned to Valentina, his expression grim. That was Tony Marcelli. He's been asking around about who might want to cause problems for us. Turns out, Vincent Carlucci has been talking to some very interesting people. Vincent? From Bellinate? Apparently, our little incident at his restaurant cost him more than we thought. 3 of his biggest investors pulled out after words spread about what happened. He's been struggling to keep the place afloat. Valentina sank into a chair, her mind racing. So he decided to get revenge by framing Maggie? It's elegant in a twisted way. He gets back at us by destroying the woman you tried to save, and he makes it look like your mercy was a mistake. 2 birds, 1 stone. The cruelty of it took Valentina's breath away. Vincent had used Maggie's past against her, knowing that her history would make her the perfect scapegoat. He'd manipulated evidence, planted the spray paint can, probably even coached the police on what questions to ask. We have to help her, Valentina said. Val, think about this. If we get involved, if we start throwing our weight around to get her released, it looks like we're protecting someone who attacked you. It makes us look weak. I don't care how it looks. Valentina's voice rose, and she felt the baby respond to her agitation with a sharp kick. An innocent woman is sitting in jail because someone wanted to hurt us. Because I tried to show mercy instead of letting you handle things your way. Dante knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? If I hadn't given her that job, if I hadn't tried to prove that people could change, Vincent never would have been able to use her like this. If you hadn't given her that job, she'd probably be homeless by now. You saved her life, Val. Don't let Vincent's games make you forget that. Valentina looked into her husband's eyes and saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Dangerous when necessary, but capable of surprising gentleness. What do we do? Dante's smile was cold and sharp. We remind Vincent Carlucci why it's a bad idea to play games with the Peakins family. And we get Maggie Brooks out of jail. How? Leave that to me. But Val. His expression grew serious. After this, no more mercy. Vincent crossed a line when he involved an innocent woman in his revenge. He's going to learn that some mistakes can't be undone. As Dante made calls to lawyers and contacts within the police department, Valentina sat by the window, her hand on her belly, thinking about Maggie sitting in a jail cell for a crime she didn't commit. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? How did it feel to have people doubt your innocence? Share your experience in the comments. The fragile trust they'd built over the past month lay in ruins, destroyed by someone else's greed and vindictiveness. But Valentina was determined to rebuild it, no matter what it cost. Because sometimes, proving someone's innocence is the only way to prove your own faith in humanity. Maggie sat on the narrow cot in her jail cell, staring at the concrete wall where someone had scratched innocent, in jagged letters. 18 hours had passed since her arrest, and the reality of her situation was sinking in like poison through her veins. Luna was staying with Mrs. Rodriguez, probably confused and scared about why her mother hadn't come home. The public defender assigned to her case was a tired-looking man who'd spent 5 minutes reviewing her file before suggesting she take a plea deal. And somewhere out there, Valentina Picunz, the woman who'd given her hope, believed she was capable of such cruelty. The worst part wasn't the jail cell or the charges. It was the look in Detective Martinez's eyes when she described Valentina's statement. The certainty that Maggie was exactly what she appeared to be, a bitter, racist woman who'd finally shown her true colors. "Brooks," the guard's voice echoed down the corridor. "You've got a visitor." Maggie's heart leaped. Maybe it was the lawyer Dante had promised to send. Maybe someone had figured out the truth. But when she was led to the visiting room, she found herself face to face with the last person she'd expected to see. Valentina sat on the other side of the reinforced glass, her hands folded over her swollen belly. Even 8.5 months pregnant, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had first intimidated Maggie. But there was something different in her eyes, doubt perhaps, or regret. Maggie picked up the phone with trembling hands. "You came. I had to see you," Valentina said, her voice barely audible through the speaker. "I had to look you in the eye and ask you directly." "Ask me what? Did you vandalize my gallery?" The question hung between them like a blade. Maggie could see the war playing out on Valentina's face, the evidence pointing to guilt, but something deeper suggesting innocence. "No," Maggie said, putting every ounce of sincerity she possessed into that single word. "I swear to you, on my daughter's life, I did not do this." Valentina studied her face for a long moment. "The police have evidence. Your fingerprints on the spray paint can. I don't know how they got there. Maybe I touched it when we were organizing the storage room, or during one of the installations. But I didn't vandalize your gallery. They said you'd been acting strangely. Asking questions about Dante's business, staying late, showing up early." Maggie's heart broke a little more. "I was trying to be the best employee you'd ever had. I was trying to prove that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. Every question I asked was because I wanted to understand the art better, to be able to talk to visitors about the pieces with real knowledge. And the early arrivals? The late nights? I've never had a job I cared about before," Maggie said, tears starting to flow. "I've never had someone believe in me the way you did. I wanted to be worthy of that belief." Valentina's own eyes were glistening now. "The police think you resented having to work for me, that you couldn't handle being dependent on my charity." "Your charity?" Maggie's voice cracked. "Valentina, you didn't give me charity. You gave me a chance to become someone better. You gave me hope when I had none. You saved my life and Luna's life. Then why does all the evidence point to you?" "Because someone wants it to," Maggie said desperately. "Someone who knows about our history, who knows I'd be the perfect suspect. Someone who wants to hurt you by destroying the person you tried to save." Valentina was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. "Dante thinks it might be Vincent Carlucci, the restaurant owner." "Vincent?" Maggie's mind raced. "But why would he?" She stopped, remembering something. The night I hurt you, Vincent was terrified. He kept saying I had no idea what I'd done, that people like your husband didn't forgive disrespect. His restaurant has been struggling since that night. Several investors pulled out after word spread about the incident. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. So he decided to get revenge by making it look like your mercy was a mistake, by proving that people like me can't really change. That's the theory, but you're not sure if you believe it. Valentina met her eyes through the glass. "I want to believe it. But Maggie, I've been hurt before by people I trusted. I've seen how convincing someone can be when they're lying to your face." The words cut deep, but Maggie understood them. Trust, once broken, was fragile even when rebuilt. And the evidence against her was damning, regardless of the truth. "What would convince you?" Maggie asked. "What would it take for you to believe me?" "I don't know," Valentina admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe the damage is already done." They sat in silence for a moment, separated by glass and doubt and the weight of everything that had brought them to this point. "Can I tell you something?" Maggie said finally. Valentina nodded. The past month working for you has been the best month of my life. Not because of the money or the benefits, but because for the first time in years, I felt like I was becoming someone I could be proud of. Someone Luna could be proud of. Maggie's voice grew stronger as she continued. You taught me that art isn't just pretty pictures on walls. It's people's pain and hope and dreams made visible. You taught me that everyone has a story, and that story matters regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Valentina's tears were flowing freely now. You taught me that anger is just pain wearing a disguise, and that I could choose to transform that pain into something beautiful instead of something destructive. You gave me the tools to become a better mother, a better person, a better human being. Maggie, I'm not asking you to believe me, Maggie interrupted. I'm asking you to remember who I was becoming. The woman who stayed late to learn about the artists, who asked questions because she genuinely cared about the answers, who looked forward to coming to work every day because she finally had a purpose. Maggie pressed her hand against the glass. That woman would never, ever hurt you. That woman would die before she'd destroy something you'd built with your own hands. Valentina stared at her for a long moment, and Maggie could see the internal battle playing out on her face. Evidence versus instinct. Logic versus faith. The safety of cynicism versus the risk of trust. I want to believe you, Valentina whispered. Then believe me. It's not that simple. If I'm wrong, if you really did this, then I've been played for a fool. Again. And if you're right, if I'm innocent, then an innocent woman goes to prison while the real culprit gets away with it. Valentina closed her eyes, her hand moving protectively over her belly. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Dante's working on getting you released, she said. His lawyers are reviewing the evidence, looking for holes in the case. And you? What are you doing? I'm choosing to trust my instincts over the evidence. I'm choosing to believe that the woman I've been working with for the past month is real, not an act. Relief flooded through Maggie like a physical force. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If it turns out you're lying, if you really did this, Dante won't show the same mercy twice. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't just about you anymore, Maggie. This is about whether I can trust my own judgment. Whether my faith in people's capacity for change is naive or justified. The weight of that responsibility settled on Maggie's shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom. She was fighting for Valentina's ability to believe in redemption. I won't let you down, Maggie said. I promise you, I will prove that your faith in me was justified. How? I don't know yet, but I will. As Valentina stood to leave, she paused at the door. Maggie, the woman you've become over the past month, hold on to her. Don't let this experience turn you back into the person you were before. I won't, Maggie promised. She's who I really am now. She's who I choose to be. After Valentina left, Maggie sat alone in the visiting room, feeling something she hadn't felt since her arrest, hope. Not just for her freedom, but for the possibility that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. When someone you care about doubts your innocence, how do you prove your truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. But hope was fragile, and Maggie knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to find a way to prove her innocence, not just to the police, but to herself and to the woman who'd given her a second chance at life. The truth was out there somewhere, and Maggie was determined to find it, even if she had to do it from behind bars. The truth came to light in the most unexpected way, 48 hours after Valentina's visit to the jail. Luna Brooks, 8 years old and tired of adults telling her that her mother was away on business, decided to take matters into her own hands. She'd overheard Mrs. Rodriguez whispering on the phone about the gallery and spray paint, and with the stubborn determination that only children possess, she convinced her babysitter to take her there. I want to see where Mama works, Luna had said, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. I want to understand what happened. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd watched Luna grow up and knew the child's fierce loyalty to her mother, couldn't refuse. They stood across the street from the Meridian Gallery, looking at the boarded-up window and the faint traces of red paint that hadn't been completely scrubbed away. Mama didn't do this, Luna said with absolute certainty. She loves this place. She talks about it all the time. I know, Mija, Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. But sometimes bad things happen to good people. That's when Luna noticed something the police had missed. Across the street, tucked between two buildings, was a small security camera mounted on a lamppost. It was old, partially hidden by overgrown ivy, and angled in a way that might have captured the gallery's front entrance. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what's that?" Luna pointed to the camera. The older woman squinted, then pulled out her phone. "I think we need to call someone." 3 hours later, at the police station, Detective Martinez stared at the laptop screen in disbelief. The security footage from the lamppost camera was grainy, but clear enough to see what had really happened that night. At 11:47 p.m., a figure in a dark hoodie approached the gallery. But this wasn't the amateur vandalism they'd assumed. The person moved with purpose, checking for other cameras, using tools to disable the gallery's main security system before beginning their work. At 12:23 a.m., the figure finished spray painting the slurs and carefully placed something in the gallery's dumpster. Something that looked suspiciously like a spray paint can. But the most damning evidence came at 12:31 a.m., when the figure pulled back their hood for just a moment to check their work. Vincent Carlucci's face was clearly visible in the lamplight. "Son of a bitch," Detective Martinez muttered. "He played us." The case against Maggie Brooks collapsed within hours. Vincent had been clever. He'd used his access to the restaurant's security footage to study Maggie's movements, had planted the spray paint can after coating it with prints lifted from surfaces she'd touched at Bellinate. He'd even coached the police on what questions to ask, knowing that Maggie's history would make her the perfect suspect. But he hadn't counted on an 8-year-old girl's determination to prove her mother's innocence. That evening at the Pekin's penthouse, Maggie stood in the elevator, her hands shaking as she watched the floor numbers climb. She'd been released from jail 6 hours ago, but the experience had left her feeling raw, exposed, fundamentally changed. The knowledge that someone had deliberately tried to destroy her life was almost harder to bear than the false accusation itself. Dante had called personally to invite her to dinner, his voice carrying an apology that went deeper than words. "My wife wants to see you," he'd said. "And I owe you an explanation." The elevator opened into a penthouse that took Maggie's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Meridian City, and the space was decorated with the same sophisticated taste she'd come to associate with Valentina. But it was warm too, lived in, with family photos and personal touches that spoke of genuine happiness. Valentina appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but gracefully despite being 9 months pregnant now. Her face lit up when she saw Maggie, and for a moment, all the doubt and pain of the past few days melted away. "You came," Valentina said, her voice thick with emotion. "You asked me to." They stood looking at each other for a moment, two women who'd been through hell together and somehow found their way back to trust. "I'm sorry," Valentina said finally. "I'm so sorry I doubted you, even for a moment." "You had every reason to doubt me," Maggie replied. "The evidence was convincing. And I haven't exactly given you reason to trust me unconditionally." "Yes, you have." Valentina moved closer, her hand reaching out to touch Maggie's arm. "Every day for the past month, you've shown me who you really are. I should have trusted that instead of letting fear make my decisions." Dante emerged from the kitchen, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression Maggie had never seen before, something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Brooks," he said formally, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Peekins. You were protecting your family." "I was letting my prejudices cloud my judgment," Dante corrected. "I assumed the worst about you because it was easier than believing people could really change. I was wrong." He poured wine for himself and Valentina, then looked at Maggie questioningly. She nodded, and he filled a third glass. "To second chances," Dante said, raising his glass. "And to the people brave enough to take them." They drank, and Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just forgiveness, it was acceptance. Recognition. The acknowledgement that she'd truly become someone different. "What happened to Vincent?" Maggie asked. Dante's expression darkened. "Vincent Carlucci is learning that there are consequences for playing games with innocent people. His restaurant is closed permanently. His business licenses have been revoked. And he's facing charges for evidence tampering, filing false police reports, and hate crimes." "Will he go to prison?" "For a very long time," Valentina said with satisfaction. But more importantly, he'll never be able to hurt anyone else the way he tried to hurt you. They moved to the dining room, where a meal had been prepared that rivaled anything Maggie had ever tasted. But the food was secondary to the conversation, the gradual rebuilding of trust that had been shattered by Vincent's manipulation. "I have something for you," Valentina said as they finished dessert. She handed Maggie an envelope with her name written in elegant script. Inside was a letter of recommendation that brought tears to Maggie's eyes. It described her as an exceptional employee with a genuine passion for art and an extraordinary capacity for growth. But more than that, it spoke of her character, her dedication, her transformation from someone bitter and angry into someone who brought light to everyone around her. "I don't understand," Maggie said. Are you firing me?" "I'm promoting you," Valentina said with a smile. "Gallery manager. Full benefits, profit sharing, and the authority to make decisions about exhibitions and acquisitions." Maggie stared at the letter, hardly believing what she was reading. "But I've only been working there for a month. I don't have the experience." "You have something better than experience," Dante interrupted. "You have passion. You have the ability to connect with people, to help them see beauty in places they never expected to find it. Besides," Valentina added, "I'm going to be taking maternity leave soon. I need someone I trust completely to run things while I'm gone." The word trust hit Maggie like a physical force. After everything that had happened, after all the doubt and fear and false accusations, Valentina was offering her complete trust. "I don't know what to say," Maggie whispered. "Say you'll take the job," Valentina said. "Say you'll help me build something beautiful." "Yes," Maggie said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." As they talked late into the evening, Maggie felt the final pieces of her old life falling away. The bitter, angry woman who dumped wine on a pregnant stranger was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from lifting others up, not tearing them down. "Can I ask you something?" Maggie said as the evening wound down. "Anything," Valentina replied. "Why did you really give me that second chance?" "The real reason." Valentina was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on her belly where their daughter was moving restlessly. "Because I saw myself in you. The anger, the pain, the feeling that the world had been unfair. But I also saw the potential for something better. And because," Dante added, "my wife believes that everyone deserves the chance to become who they're meant to be, not who their worst moment made them." "Do you think I've become that person?" Maggie asked. Valentina smiled, and it was the warmest expression Maggie had ever seen. "I think you're still becoming her. And I think that's exactly as it should be." 6 months later, the Meridian Gallery buzzed with activity as Maggie put the finishing touches on their newest exhibition, Redemption and Renewal, Art from the Margins. It featured work by artists who'd overcome addiction, poverty, incarceration, and other challenges to create something beautiful from their pain. Luna sat in the corner, working on her homework while keeping one eye on the gallery preparations. At 9 years old, she'd become the unofficial mascot of the space, charming visitors with her enthusiasm for art and her fierce pride in her mother's work. "Mama, Mrs. Valentina is here," Luna called out. Maggie looked up to see Valentina entering with her 3-month-old daughter, Isabella, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Motherhood had only enhanced Valentina's natural grace, and she moved through the gallery with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found perfect balance in her life. "How does it look?" Maggie asked, gesturing to the exhibition. "Perfect," Valentina said, studying the carefully curated pieces. "You've outdone yourself. I had a good teacher." They stood together, looking at a painting that had become the centerpiece of the show, Marcus Chen's Rage and Redemption, the same piece Maggie had analyzed during her first weeks at the gallery. But now she saw it differently, understood it on a level that went beyond academic knowledge. "You know what I love most about this piece?" Maggie said. "What's that?" "It shows that transformation is possible, that you can take the worst parts of yourself and turn them into something meaningful, something beautiful." Valentina smiled, shifting Isabella to her other arm. "Sounds like someone I know." As the evening's opening reception began, Maggie watched the gallery fill with people from all walks of life. There were collectors and critics, but also community members, students, and families who'd never set foot in an art gallery before. She'd worked hard to make the space welcoming to everyone, regardless of their background or knowledge of art. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maggie said as the crowd gathered, "welcome to Redemption and Renewal. Tonight, we celebrate the power of art to transform not just the artist, but everyone who experiences it. We celebrate the idea that our worst moments don't define us. Our response to those moments does. What's the most important second chance you've ever been given? How did it change your life? Share your story in the comments." As applause filled the gallery, Maggie caught Valentina's eye across the room. They shared a look of understanding, of gratitude, of friendship that had been forged in the fire of conflict and emerged stronger than either had thought possible. The bitter waitress who dumped wine on a pregnant woman was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that true power came from building others up, that real strength was found in vulnerability, and that the most beautiful art came from transforming pain into purpose. And in that transformation, both women had found something they'd been searching for their entire lives. The knowledge that redemption was always possible, forgiveness could heal the deepest wounds, and love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the universe. The story that had begun with hatred and humiliation had become one of hope and healing. And as Maggie looked around the gallery filled with art and laughter and the promise of new beginnings, she knew that this was just the beginning of the beautiful life she was finally brave enough to build.